Karl Marxকে এত why do we remember Marx after 200 years? I think his contributions, detailed contributions, many of you have read Marx and know I'm not going into. But two main fundamental breaks that he made, and that continues to remain valid and would continue to remain valid as long as capitalism lasts. What is the first break? The first break is what I would call epistemic. সৃজন আমায় বলেছে এপিস্টেমিককে বাংলায় বলে জ্ঞানতাত্ত্বিক। জ্ঞানতাত্ত্বিক একটা ব্রেক যেটা মার্কস করেছিলেন। How do I explain it? Suppose you look at a slave society. It is perfectly possible to argue that the interest of the slave is simply to obey the slave owner. If you don't, he's going to whip you, he's going to starve you, he's going to thrash you. You can similarly say that in a caste society, the interest of the Dalit is actually to be invisible. Because if you are visible, in that case, maybe you are going to pollute the upper caste and he's going to beat you, he's going to lynch you. So it is perfectly possible to argue that in an oppressive society, the interest of the oppressed lies in really keeping the oppressors happy. But on the other hand, we know that it is perfectly possible, in fact necessary to argue, in an oppressive society, you must overthrow oppression. Your interest lies in overthrowing oppression. What is the difference between these two propositions? Both appear perfectly valid, perfectly correct. The difference lies in the fact that one of them is looking at the system from inside, assuming that the system would continue, and within that making an adjustment, while the other is looking at the system from outside, at the fact of its oppression, at the dehumanizing nature of that system. This idea of looking at a system epistemically from within and looking at the same system epistemically from outside is a fundamental difference. And Marx was the first person to look at the system consistently epistemically from outside. And Marxism is that view which above all looks at the capitalist system consistently from outside. That is the first contribution. There is no other system that really consistently looks at capitalism, no other theoretical system that consistently looks at capitalism epistemically from outside. বাইরে থেকে ক্যাপিটালিজমকে দেখা। The moment you look at a system epistemically from outside, already you have in mind a different system. So you are actually looking at this system in terms of another which is possible. This is a general proposition. Dalit যখন বলে যে caste should be annihilated, he is already visualizing a world in which caste does not exist. When the slave says that, no, I'm not going to listen to the slave owner, he's already visualizing a world where slavery does not exist. Now, Marx was the first who actually looked at capitalism epistemically from outside, and he did so. In the process of doing so, already he is talking about an alternative system. The idea of looking at it epistemically from outside is synonymous with, it's the same thing as actually having an alternative system, from whose perspective then you look at this particular one. The second contribution of Marx, which I think is very important, is the following. That in Marx, it is not, we say that the capitalist oppresses the worker, or the capitalist exploits the worker, and so on, fine. But actually, it is the system in which all individual agents are forced to act in particular ways. Marx referred to the capitalist as capital personified. মানে capitalist a kharap lok na. He is not exploiting because he is a bad person. He is exploiting because that is the logic of capital. The whole idea of being, if he did not exploit, he would stop being a capitalist. So the logic of capital works itself out through the individuals participating in the system. Now, if that is the case, then, that's the fundamental difference between Marxism and liberalism. In liberalism, you think of the individuals as independent agents. They come together. Maybe the results are not what they expected. Maybe they come together, but there's oppression, so they want to get rid of oppression. But if you think of the system in which every individual is alienated, every individual is acting out a certain role because the system forces you to act out that role. If you did not, then you'd fall by the wayside. Then you'd stop being a capitalist. If the worker does not obey what the discipline of the factory is, the worker would be thrown out. The worker would in fact join the reserve army of labor, become unemployed. If the capitalist does not accumulate, in that case the capitalist would get beaten in the process of competition, would not be able to introduce technological progress, and if the capitalist gets beaten in the process of competition, would be thrown out, would stop being capitalist. So it is a system in which the individual is not the hero. The individual is in fact caught as a cog in the impersonal working out of the logic of the system. In other words, the system and the logic, it works out through the mediation of individual actions, but the individuals are forced to act in those particular ways. Now this, as I said, again suggests that you cannot reform the system because the system has a certain logic. Even if you temporarily reform the system, the logic would assert itself and once more you would be back to square one, which is what we are seeing. After the war, there was an effort to reform capitalism. Everybody talked about welfare capitalism and so on. When I was your age, a book had come out, Has Capitalism Changed? Look it out at the it's changed. Now we don't have predatory capitalism, exploitative, horrible system, but now we have welfare capitalism. But again, now we see that even the welfare measures in Europe are all being reversed. And we see all over the world enormous increases in wealth and income inequalities. Yet Piketty and many others have been writing. So the point is that this is a system which you cannot reform because it's a system which, works on its own. It has an inner logic. It is what I call a spontaneous system. It just works in a particular way in which all the individuals who act in it, who participate in it, are forced to act in a certain way. They are the ways in which the system works itself out. Now the point is, liberalism does not recognize this. You look at any liberal author. Liberalism recognizes limits on human freedom arising from two or three sources. It looks at limits on human freedom arising from other individuals. Amar Grame actor lok ache, who is a landlord, he oppresses me, obviously he has got lakhiyals and so on. So that is a limit on my freedom. Liberalism perfectly well recognizes it. It recognizes limits on freedom arising from gangs, from mafia gangs. It recognizes limits on freedom arising from the state. Obviously, that the state can be dictatorial, can be authoritarian, therefore it limits human freedom, limits individual freedom. Liberalism does not recognize the limits on freedom arising from the operation of the system itself. And once you do that, then it is very clear that even the liberal ideal of human freedom cannot be achieved within the capitalist system itself as the liberals claim it can be achieved. The liberals claim it can be achieved because they don't see the system as itself being an oppressive force. Now that was Marx's fundamental contribution, that he actually saw the limits on human freedom arising not because of some emperor, or because of some mafia, or because of some goons, or because of some kind of oppressive force that can be perceived and seen and acted against, but arising impersonally because of the working of the system. Now, I think that is a view, and of course Marx elaborated that view in very many different ways. He talked about capitalism as a system being subject to certain immanent tendencies. These tendencies are really tendencies which work themselves out through individual action, but every individual is also a victim of these tendencies. And these tendencies, like tendency towards centralization of capital, tendency towards the social reproduction of the reserve army of labor, etc., are all quite well known. But these tendencies can only be overcome. The tendency, for instance, to generate wealth at one pole and poverty at another, these tendencies can only be overcome by overthrowing the system. They cannot be overcome through any reforms of the system, because even if temporarily, under certain very special circumstances, the working class is strong enough, like in the post-Second World War period, to bring about some reforms in the system fairly soon would once more overthrow all these reforms, and its immanent tendencies would reassert themselves. But of course, Marxism does not end with what Marx had said. It actually begins with what Marx had said. It is very important, therefore, for us to actually carry Marxism forward. In other words, to develop Marxism. Marxism must always be developed. And the development of Marxism must also begin by looking at where Marx himself was incomplete. And what I'm going to argue now is that when you develop Marxism, when you actually overcome the incompleteness of Marxism, then many of the propositions which Marx had advanced become even more true than the arguments that he himself had given forth. In other words, his propositions acquire greater strength the moment you go beyond Marx. Let me just kind of bring one fact to your notice. When you look at capital, many of you would have looked at capital. When you look at capital, there is no mention of any other class other than the capitalists and the workers. There is no mention of the peasants. There is no mention of anybody else. The only exploitation you find in capital is the exploitation that the capitalists kind of impose on the workers. Now, why is that? And obviously because Marx himself was concerned with the European proletarian revolution. Revolution, he thought, was going to come in the advanced countries, going to be a proletarian revolution, and of course, for the proletariat to be developed, the capitalism itself must have got developed, and the country where maximum development had taken place, according to him, was England. In England at that time, there was no peasantry. There was no peasantry. In fact, even agriculture in England was capitalist agriculture when Marx was writing. There were landlords, there were capitalist farmers, and there were laborers. But you didn't have any peasants. The peasantry that had existed in England had got destroyed through a process which Marx called primitive accumulation of capital, in which those peasants were thrown out of the land, enclosure movement. They were all literally expropriated. They were not allowed entry into the common land, and they were thrown out of the land, and consequently they became laborers. They went into the towns looking for work, and of course subsequently capitalism developed both on the land and also outside. But once capitalism had developed in England, you did not find any more peasants left. Now this has given rise to three propositions. First proposition is that primitive accumulation of capital is something that only happened before capitalism came into being. Once it came into being, capitalism grew on its own, primitive accumulation got over. That is the first proposition. The second proposition is that the victims of primitive accumulation, namely the peasants and the petty producers who are all displaced, they ultimately, leaving aside a small group of what Marx called reserve army of labor, they ultimately get absorbed into capitalism itself as workers. The third proposition, which follows from these two, is that therefore, on the whole, primitive accumulation is a part of mankind's progress. We should not shed too many tears about it, because after all, unnatita to ebhabei hoy. So primitive accumulation is something which we have to accept as part of mankind's progress, mankind's march through history. Each of these propositions is wrong. Marx never made this proposition, but they are sometimes read into Marx. Each of these propositions is wrong. Let me just try and give you some facts. Primitive accumulation does not end with the coming of capitalism. The attack on the peasantry, the dispossession of the peasantry, the attack on petty producers goes on throughout the history of capitalism. Colonial plunder was a part of primitive accumulation. And in 1881, 2 years before his death, Marx wrote a letter to a Russian narodnik economist called Danielson. In that letter he said that what the English take from India annually, without any quid pro quo, and this is not counting what they take and spend inside the country, what they simply ship back home, without any quid pro quo, he's referring to the drain of course, amounts to the income annually of 60 million laborers, industrial and agriculture in India. In other words, obviously this is a process of primitive accumulation. It's an attack on the colonial economy, it's an attack on the peasantry, it's an attack through taxes on the entire system of production that existed outside of the metropolis. So the idea that primitive accumulation comes to an end once capitalism has got established, and then the entire accumulation occurs only on the basis of the surplus value that is internally generated, is not a correct idea. The second proposition, that the victims of primitive accumulation are automatically absorbed into the system as workers, is also a wrong proposition. The reason why in Europe, despite the destruction of petty production, you did not have massive unemployment and so on, is because there was huge immigration in the 19th century. 50 million Europeans migrated from Europe to the temperate regions of white settlements like Australia, Canada, United States, New Zealand, South Africa, and so on. So that you actually had a situation where those who had been dispossessed, those who had been displaced, they simply migrated to new lands. And what did they do there? They actually got rid of the local Amerindians or the local inhabitants, and having done so, they took over their land and of course started, set themselves up as farmers.